Here's something nobody told you about sleep. It's not just recovery time for your body. It's not even just when your brain does its nightly filing system cleanup. What if I told you that sleep is actually when your most authentic, powerful self gets to come out and play? I know. You're probably thinking, great, another person telling me I need better sleep hygiene. Trust me, this isn't about blackout curtains and magnesium supplements. Although those things are nice, this is about something way more interesting, something that could completely change how you move through the world. See, Gabe, there's this energy inside you. Call it your divine feminine energy, your intuition, your inner knowing, your authentic self, whatever feels right. Most of the time, during your waking hours, this energy is basically sitting in the passenger seat while your logical, practical, get stuff done mind drives the car. But at night, when your conscious mind finally clocks out, that's when she gets to take the wheel. The thing about modern women and power, we live in a world that taught us to be productive above all else, to hustle, to optimize, to push through. And look, there's nothing wrong with ambition, nothing wrong with working hard or going after what you want. But here's what's wild. We've been trying to access our power the same way men do, through force, through grinding, through sheer willpower, and it's exhausting us. Your feminine energy doesn't work like that. It doesn't respond to force or pressure or 5-year plans. It responds to flow, to intuition, to allowing rather than pushing. And guess what happens when you're constantly in push mode during the day? Your nervous system never gets the message that it's safe to drop into that deeper, more receptive state, even at night. So you're literally sleeping in stress mode. Your body is resting, sure, but your energy, your spirit, she's still on high alert, waiting for the next thing she needs to fix or figure out or optimize. What nobody tells you about your nighttime self. Here's something I wish someone had told me when I was younger. You have 2 different selves. There is your daytime self, the one who makes lists and answers emails and figures out what to wear and navigates social situations and gets things done. And then there's your nighttime self. She's the one who knows things without knowing how she knows them. She's the one who has those random insights in the shower, or who suddenly understands why that relationship wasn't working, or who gets downloads about what direction to take her life. Most of us have been treating sleep like it's just maintenance time for our daytime self, like we're charging our phone overnight so we can get back to the real business of living. But what if your nighttime self is actually where your real power lives? What if all the answers you've been searching for during your waking hours are sitting right there, waiting for you to create the right conditions for them to emerge? I'm not talking about some mystical woo-woo concept here. I'm talking about something you can actually experience, something you can learn to access, something that will change how you feel in your own skin. The ancient secret we forgot. There's this thing our great-great-great-grandmothers knew that we somehow forgot along the way. They understood that nighttime wasn't just about rest. It was sacred time. It was when women would connect with their intuition, their dreams, their inner knowing. They had evening rituals that weren't about productivity or optimization. They were about creating space for a different kind of awareness to emerge. They knew that a woman's power wasn't just about what she could accomplish during the day. It was about her ability to access wisdom, intuition, and creative energy that couldn't be forced or manufactured. And they built their lives around honoring both sides of themselves, the active, doing energy, and the receptive, knowing energy. Somewhere along the way, we lost this. We started treating our feminine energy like it was something soft and weak and impractical, something we needed to overcome or manage or push past in order to be successful. But here's what I've learned. Your feminine energy isn't weak. It's not impractical. It's actually the source of your deepest power. And sleep is when you get to remember this. Why this matters? Right now, look around. The world is intense right now. We're dealing with more information, more pressure, more choices than any generation of women before us. We're expected to have it all figured out by the time we're 25 to know exactly what we want and how to get it. And a lot of us are burning out trying to keep up. We're anxious, we're overwhelmed, we're tired in a way that sleep doesn't seem to fix. We're successful on paper, but feeling disconnected from ourselves. We're achieving our goals, but somehow feeling empty. This is what happens when we're only operating from one type of energy. When we're trying to force our way through life instead of learning to work with our natural rhythms and intuition. Your divine feminine energy, that deeper, wiser part of you, she's not trying to make you weak or passive or unambitious. She's trying to show you a different way to move through the world, a way that feels more authentic, more sustainable, more aligned with who you actually are. And she's been trying to get your attention every single night. The questions that started everything A few years ago, I started noticing something weird. I would go to bed feeling one way about a situation, confused, stuck, unsure, and wake up with complete clarity about what to do. Not because I had consciously worked through the problem, but because the answer was just there. Or I'd have these incredibly vivid dreams that felt more real than my waking life. Dreams where I felt more like myself than I did during the day. Or I'd wake up with creative ideas, insights about people in my life, or just a different feeling in my body. Like I had somehow reset overnight, not just physically, but energetically. I started getting curious. What was happening during those 8 hours? What was my unconscious mind doing that my conscious mind couldn't? And more importantly, how could I work with this instead of just letting it happen randomly? That curiosity led me down a rabbit hole that completely changed my relationship with sleep, with my own intuition, and with what it means to be a woman in this world. What you're about to discover. Over the next 8 parts, we're going to explore something that could fundamentally shift how you experience yourself and your life. In part 2, I'm going to tell you about the night everything clicked for me, the night I realized I had been approaching sleep and my own feminine energy completely backwards. You'll hear about the weird signs that had been showing up in my dreams that I had totally been ignoring. Part 3 gets into the actual science of what happens in your brain and body during sleep that makes this kind of transformation possible, and why women's sleep cycles are fundamentally different from men's in ways that actually give us superpowers. In part 4, we'll dive into all the things that keep us stuck in masculine energy mode, even when we're sleeping. The cultural programming, the daily habits, even the way we think about rest that's working against us. Part 5 is where things get practical. I'll walk you through the 3-phase sleep ritual that changed everything for me. The simple evening practices that signal to your body and spirit that it's safe to drop into that deeper, more receptive state. Part 6 is about learning to recognize when this is actually working, how your dreams start shifting, what changes in your waking life, and how to tell the difference between random sleep weirdness and actual messages from your intuitive self. Part 7 covers what happens when everything clicks, how you'll know the transformation is real, how other people respond to your energy differently, and what it feels like when your sleeping and waking selves finally align. And Part 8 is about integration, how to maintain this new relationship with your feminine energy, how to handle resistance from yourself and others, and what this all means for how you move through the world. The promise I'm making you. I'm not going to promise you that this will solve all your problems or that you'll wake up tomorrow as some perfectly enlightened version of yourself. That's not how transformation works, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. What I will promise you is this. If you're willing to approach sleep with curiosity instead of just treating it like a necessary inconvenience, if you're open to the possibility that your nighttime self has wisdom, your daytime self needs, and if you're ready to explore what your authentic feminine power actually feels like, this could change everything. Not in some dramatic overnight way, but in the quiet, sustainable way that real transformation happens. The way that makes you feel more like yourself than you felt in years. The question that started it all. Here's what I want you to think about as we dive into this journey together. What if the person you are when you're deeply relaxed, when your guard is down, when you're not trying to be anything for anyone? What if that's actually who you're supposed to be? What if all the pushing and forcing and trying to figure everything out with your logical mind is just keeping you from accessing the answers that are already inside you? What if your dreams, your intuition, your gut feelings aren't just random neurological events, but actually your wisest self trying to guide you? And what if learning to listen to her, to really listen, could change not just how you sleep, but how you live? These are the questions that opened a door for me that I didn't even know existed. A door to a different way of being in the world that feels more authentic, more sustainable, and more aligned with who I actually am underneath all the shoulds and have-tos and expectations. In part 2, I'm going to tell you about the specific night when everything shifted. The night I stopped fighting my feminine energy and started working with her instead. The night I realized that my insomnia wasn't a problem to solve. It was a message I needed to hear. But here's the thing I need you to know before we go any further. This isn't about becoming some different person. This isn't about fixing what's wrong with you or optimizing yourself into some ideal version of femininity. This is about remembering who you already are underneath all the noise, about accessing the power you already have but might not know how to use, about learning to trust the wisdom that's been trying to get your attention every single night. Your divine feminine energy isn't something you need to develop or earn or work toward. She's already there. She's been there all along. She's just been waiting for you to create the space for her to emerge. Let me tell you about the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday in March. Nothing special about the day. I'd been going through one of those periods where everything felt off. You know the feeling, like you're living your life, but somehow watching it from the outside at the same time. Going through all the motions, but feeling disconnected from yourself. I'd been having trouble sleeping for weeks. Not the kind of insomnia where you can't fall asleep. The kind where you fall asleep fine, but wake up at 3 a.m. with your mind racing about everything and nothing. Work stuff, relationship stuff, this general feeling that I was somehow doing life wrong but couldn't figure out what needed to change. So that Tuesday night, I'm lying there at 3:17 a.m. because of course I checked the clock. Wide awake again, feeling frustrated with my brain for not just letting me rest. And instead of doing what I usually did, which was scroll my phone or try to force myself back to sleep or get up and do something productive, I just lay there. I started paying attention to what was actually happening in my body and mind instead of fighting it. And that's when I noticed something weird, the strange awareness that changed everything. When I stopped trying to make the wakefulness go away and just observed it, I realized my mind wasn't actually racing with anxiety like I thought it was. It was quiet, almost eerily quiet. But there was this awareness there that felt different from my daytime thinking. It's hard to explain, but you know how sometimes you're in a conversation and you suddenly understand something about the person that they never actually said out loud, or how you walk into a room and immediately get a feeling about the energy there, even though nothing obvious happened? That's the kind of knowing I'm talking about. Not logical step-by-step thinking, something more intuitive and immediate. So I'm lying there in this strange, quiet awareness, and suddenly I'm understanding things about my life that I'd been trying to figure out for months. Not because I was analyzing or problem solving, but because the answers were just there. I understood why that friendship had been feeling draining lately. I understood what I actually wanted to do with my career underneath all the shoulds and expectations. I understood why I'd been feeling so disconnected because I'd been trying to live my life entirely from my head instead of trusting what my body and intuition were telling me. It wasn't like having thoughts about these things. It was like remembering something I already knew but had forgotten. And here's the weirdest part. I felt more like myself than I had in months. More grounded, more clear, more connected to who I actually was underneath all the noise of daily life. I fell back asleep around 4:30, and when I woke up the next morning, something had fundamentally shifted. The morning. After I wish I could say I woke up feeling like I'd unlocked the secrets of the universe or something dramatic like that. But the truth is, the change was much more subtle and much more powerful. I felt settled. Like I'd been carrying around this low-level anxiety that I didn't even realize was there, and it had just evaporated overnight. When I got ready for work, instead of the usual mental chatter about what to wear or whether I looked okay, I just got dressed. When I was making coffee, instead of planning out my entire day in my head, I actually tasted the coffee. It sounds so simple, but I realized I'd been living most of my life on autopilot, disconnected from the present moment and from my own internal guidance system. That day at work, I made decisions differently. Instead of overthinking everything or asking 10 different people for their opinions, I would pause for a second and check in with what felt right, and somehow everything flowed more easily. A coworker mentioned a project she needed help with, and instead of immediately saying yes, which I would normally do, or immediately saying no, which I'd been trying to do more of, I just listened to what my gut was telling me. It was a clear yes, not because I should help, but because I genuinely wanted to and had the bandwidth. In a meeting that afternoon, when my boss asked for ideas about a problem we'd been stuck on, instead of frantically trying to come up with something smart sounding, I just shared the first thing that came to mind. It ended up being exactly what we needed. By the end of the day, I felt like I'd been operating from some deeper, wiser part of myself that I hadn't even known was there. What I didn't understand yet, at the time, I thought I just had a really good night's sleep. I figured the 3 a.m. wake up had somehow reset my system, and maybe I should try to recreate it. So the next night, I intentionally stayed up late, hoping I'd wake up in that same quiet, aware state. Of course, it didn't work. I just felt tired and cranky the next day. I tried going to bed earlier. I tried meditation apps. I tried journaling before bed. All good things, but none of them recreated that experience. What I didn't understand yet was that what had happened wasn't about the timing or the technique. It was about finally stopping my fight against my own natural rhythms and creating space for a different kind of awareness to emerge. I'd been treating my nighttime wakefulness like a problem to solve instead of a doorway to walk through. Pattern I started noticing. Over the next few weeks, I started paying more attention to my sleep patterns and how I felt when I woke up. And I began to notice something interesting. The nights when I tried to force myself to sleep a certain way or follow some specific routine, I'd wake up feeling okay, but nothing special. Just regular, daytime mind Sarah getting ready to tackle another day. but the nights when I let myself be wherever I was, whether that was falling asleep immediately or lying awake for a while or waking up in the middle of the night, those were the nights I'd wake up feeling more connected to myself. It was like there was this part of me that came out when my conscious, controlling mind wasn't running the show. And she was way wiser and more tuned in than the me who was trying to optimize her sleep schedule. I started having dreams that felt more meaningful. Not weird, random dreams that made no sense, but dreams that felt like messages. Dreams where I'd work through emotional stuff or get clarity about situations in my life. I'd wake up with creative ideas, with solutions to problems I hadn't even been consciously thinking about, with insights about people in my life that helped me understand our relationships better. And my body started feeling different too, more relaxed during the day, even when stressful things happened. Like I was operating from a deeper place of calm instead of constantly being in low-level fight or flight mode. What our ancestors knew. This got me curious about how other women throughout history had approached sleep and nighttime, and what I discovered completely blew my mind. Before electric lights, before the Industrial Revolution, before our 24/7 always-on culture, women had completely different relationships with nighttime and rest. They understood that there were different kinds of time. Daytime was for action, for doing, for engaging with the external world, but nighttime was sacred time, time for introspection, for connecting with intuition, for accessing wisdom that couldn't be reached through logical thinking. Many cultures had evening rituals that weren't about productivity or efficiency. They were about creating space for the inner world to emerge. Women would gather to share dreams, to talk about the insights that came to them during quiet moments, to honor the wisdom that emerged when they weren't trying to figure everything out with their minds. They knew that feminine energy operates differently than masculine energy. Masculine energy is more linear, more focused on goals and outcomes. Feminine energy is more cyclical, more intuitive, more about flow and receptivity, and they built their lives around honoring both types of energy instead of trying to operate from just one. The signs I'd been missing. As I started paying more attention to my nighttime experiences, I realized there had been signs all along that I'd been completely ignoring. Those 3 a.m. wake-ups, they weren't happening randomly. They were happening when I had decisions to make or emotions to process, or when I was out of alignment with what I actually wanted in some area of my life. Those vivid dreams that stayed with me all day. They weren't just brain static. They were my subconscious mind working through stuff and trying to communicate with my conscious mind. That feeling of being more creative and insightful right before falling asleep or right after waking up, that wasn't just because I was relaxed. It was because my logical, analytical mind wasn't dominating, so my intuitive mind could finally be heard. Even my sleep position and how I felt when I woke up were trying to tell me things. When I was stressed or out of alignment, I'd sleep restlessly and wake up feeling disconnected from my body. When I was in a good place emotionally and spiritually, I'd sleep deeply and wake up feeling integrated and whole. My dreams had themes that connected to what was happening in my waking life, but I'd never paid attention to the patterns. I'd just dismissed them as weird brain stuff instead of recognizing them as communications from my inner wisdom. The resistance that showed up. Once I started paying attention to all of this, I noticed something else. There was a part of me that was resistant to trusting these nighttime insights and experiences. My logical mind would wake up and immediately try to dismiss whatever understanding or clarity I'd received during the night. It would tell me that dreams don't mean anything, that those 3 a.m. insights were just sleep-deprived thoughts, that I was being impractical or unrealistic. I realized I'd been trained to trust only the information that came through logical analysis and to dismiss anything that felt too intuitive or subtle or nonlinear. But here's what I started to notice. When I acted on the guidance that came through during those quiet nighttime moments, things worked out better. When I dismissed it and just used logical analysis, I'd often end up making decisions that looked good on paper but didn't feel right in my body. It was like I had access to additional information during those receptive states that my daytime mind couldn't access. Information about what was actually aligned for me, what would support my well-being, what would move me toward what I actually wanted instead of what I thought I should want. The energy shift. The more I learned to work with my natural sleep rhythms instead of against them, the more I noticed changes in how I moved through the world during the day. I became less reactive. When stressful things happened, instead of immediately going into problem-solving mode or anxiety mode, I would naturally pause and check in with what felt like the right response. I started making decisions more quickly, but with more confidence. Instead of endlessly analyzing pros and cons, I would get still for a moment and sense what felt aligned. And those decisions almost always worked out better than the ones I made purely through logical analysis. I became more aware of other people's energy and how different environments affected me, not in an overwhelming way, but in a way that helped me navigate relationships and situations with more wisdom. I started trusting my body more. Instead of pushing through fatigue or ignoring what I needed, I would listen to the signals and respond accordingly. And paradoxically, I had more energy overall because I was working with my natural rhythms instead of against them. Most importantly, I started feeling like I was living my own life instead of some version of life that looked good from the outside but didn't actually fit who I was. The question that kept coming up. As I continued exploring this, one question kept coming up. What would life be like if I treated my feminine energy as a source of wisdom instead of something to overcome or manage? What would happen if I stopped trying to operate like a machine that just needs the right inputs to produce the right outputs and started operating like a living system that has its own intelligence and rhythms? What would change if I trusted that my body, my dreams, my intuition, and my emotional responses were giving me valuable information instead of dismissing them as inconvenient or irrational? And most intriguingly, what would happen if I learned to create the conditions for my deepest wisdom to emerge regularly instead of just waiting for it to show up randomly? The deeper recognition. The more I explored these questions, the more I realized that what I was discovering wasn't just about sleep. It was about learning to access and trust a completely different way of knowing and being. Our culture teaches us that the rational, analytical mind should be in charge of everything. That if we can't explain something logically or measure it objectively, it's not real or valuable. But what I was experiencing suggested that there's another kind of intelligence available to us. An intelligence that operates through feeling, through intuition, through dreams and symbols, and subtle body sensations. And this intelligence wasn't inferior to logical thinking. It was complementary. It could perceive things that the logical mind couldn't. It could synthesize information in ways that linear analysis couldn't. It could guide us toward what was actually aligned for us in ways that pros and cons lists couldn't. The problem was that I'd never learned how to access this intelligence intentionally. I'd only experienced it randomly, in moments when my analytical mind happened to be quiet. But what if it didn't have to be random? What if I could learn to create the conditions for this deeper knowing to emerge regularly? The trail of breadcrumbs. That's when I started researching everything I could find about sleep, dreams, feminine energy, and intuitive intelligence. I read books by neuroscientists and sleep researchers. I studied the practices of indigenous cultures that honor both logical and intuitive ways of knowing. I talked to older women who seemed to have a natural connection to their inner wisdom. And what I discovered was that this wasn't some new age concept I was making up. This was ancient knowledge that had been suppressed or forgotten in our modern, hyper-rational culture. Women throughout history have known that we have access to different types of intelligence and that creating space for receptive, intuitive awareness is essential for well-being and wise decision-making. The specific practices varied across cultures and time periods, but the underlying understanding was consistent. There's wisdom available in quiet, receptive states that can't be accessed through thinking and analyzing. And sleep, particularly the liminal states between waking and sleeping, has always been recognized as a powerful doorway to this deeper knowing. In part 3, I'm going to share what I learned about the actual science behind all of this. What's happening in your brain and body during sleep that makes this kind of transformation possible? Why women's sleep cycles are different from men's in ways that actually give us superpowers. And the breakthrough moment when I realized that my insomnia wasn't a bug, it was a feature. Because here's what I discovered. Everything I thought I knew about sleep was wrong, and everything our culture teaches us about how to access our power and wisdom is backwards. The real magic doesn't happen when we're trying to make something happen. It happens when we finally create space for what's already there to emerge. After that night in March when everything clicked, I became obsessed with understanding what had actually happened to me. Like, what was going on in my brain that allowed me to access that different kind of knowing? And why did it feel so much more natural and authentic than my normal way of thinking? So I dove headfirst into sleep research, neuroscience studies, anything I could get my hands on about what happens in our brains when we're not consciously controlling them. And what I discovered completely blew my mind. It turns out that everything I thought I knew about sleep was wrong. Not just wrong, but backwards. I'd been thinking about sleep as this passive thing that happens to us when actually it's this incredibly active, dynamic process where our brains are doing things they literally cannot do while we're awake. But here's the part that really got me. Women's brains do sleep differently than men's brains. And instead of this being some kind of disadvantage or quirk we need to work around, it's actually our superpower. What actually happens? when your conscious mind goes offline. Let me start with what blew my mind the most. You know how during the day, your brain has this constant chatter going on? That voice in your head that's planning and analyzing and commenting on everything that's happening? That voice comes from your prefrontal cortex, basically your brain's CEO. It's the part that makes decisions, solves problems, controls impulses, and tries to make sense of everything in a logical, linear way. And during most of your waking hours, this CEO is running the show. It's filtering everything you experience through your existing beliefs and knowledge, trying to categorize and understand and control. But here's what's fascinating. When you fall asleep, especially during certain stages of sleep, this CEO basically clocks out. The prefrontal cortex goes quiet, and when that happens, other parts of your brain get to come online in ways they can't during waking consciousness. Your default mode network, which is like your brain's screensaver, becomes incredibly active. This is the network that's responsible for self-reflection, memory consolidation, and what researchers call autobiographical planning. Basically, it's figuring out who you are and where you're going. Your limbic system, which processes emotions and stores memories, starts communicating directly with other brain regions without the prefrontal cortex filtering or editing the conversation. And your right hemisphere, the part of your brain that processes intuition, creativity, and holistic thinking, gets to be way more active than it usually is during your left brain-dominated waking hours. It's like your brain goes from being run by a strict corporate manager to being run by this wise, intuitive counsel that can see patterns and connections your conscious mind misses. The 4 stages of sleep magic. Sleep researchers have identified 4 main stages of sleep, and each one gives your brain access to different kinds of processing and insight. Stage 1 is that drowsy in-between state where you're not quite awake but not quite asleep. Your brain waves start to slow down and you begin to lose conscious control over your thoughts. This is when a lot of people have those random creative insights or solutions to problems they have been stuck on. Stage 2 is light sleep. Your conscious mind is definitely offline now, but your brain is incredibly busy. It's consolidating memories from the day, deciding what's important to keep and what to forget. But it's not just filing things away randomly. It's making new connections between seemingly unrelated pieces of information. Stages 3 and 4 are deep sleep, and this is where things get really interesting. Your brain waves slow way down into what's called delta waves. Your prefrontal cortex is completely quiet, and your brain starts doing this thing called global workspace processing, where information from all different brain regions gets integrated in ways that can't happen when your conscious mind is trying to control everything. This is when your brain can make connections between your emotions, your memories, your values, and your current life situation that your logical mind would never make. It's when insights emerge that feel like they come from somewhere deeper than your normal thinking. But the stage that changed everything for me to understand was REM sleep. REM sleep, where your inner wisdom lives. REM sleep is when most of your vivid dreaming happens. And for the longest time, scientists thought dreams were just random brain static, your mind's way of clearing out junk from the day. But newer research shows that REM sleep is actually when your brain does some of its most important work. During REM, your brain is almost as active as it is when you're awake, but it's active in a completely different way. The logical, linear parts of your brain are quiet, while the creative, intuitive, pattern recognition parts are firing like crazy. Your brain is taking all the information from your day, not just the factual information, but the emotional information, the subtle social cues you picked up on, the things your body noticed that your conscious mind dismissed, and it's weaving it all together into a coherent understanding. Dreams aren't random. They're your brain's way of processing complex emotional and psychological material that your conscious mind doesn't know how to handle. That weird dream about your ex-boyfriend showing up at your childhood home with a briefcase full of butterflies? Your brain is probably working through some unresolved feelings about that relationship and how it connects to your early experiences of love and security. That dream where you're trying to find your way through a maze but the walls keep changing? Your subconscious might be processing feelings about a situation in your waking life where you feel lost, or like the rules keep changing. Your dreaming brain doesn't think in words and logic. It thinks in symbols, emotions, and associations. And it can make connections and reveal insights that your logical mind would never arrive at. Why women sleep is different and better. Here's where things get really interesting. Men and women don't just sleep differently. We have fundamentally different sleep architecture. And once I understood this, everything about my own sleep patterns started to make sense. Women spend more time in deep sleep stages than men do. We have more active REM periods. Our sleep cycles are more flexible and responsive to our hormonal fluctuations, our emotional state, and our environment. For years, sleep researchers studied mostly men and then applied those findings to women. And when women's sleep didn't match the male pattern, it was treated as a problem to fix. But it's not a problem. It's a feature. Women's brains are wired to be more connected between the left and right hemispheres. We have a thicker corpus callosum, the bridge between the two sides of the brain. This means we naturally integrate logical and intuitive thinking more than men do. And during sleep, this integration becomes even more powerful. While men's brains tend to compartmentalize during sleep, processing different types of information in different regions, women's brains maintain more cross-regional communication. We're literally integrating more types of information during our sleep cycles. This is why women often wake up with insights about relationships, with creative solutions to problems, or with a sense of clarity about situations that felt confusing before sleep. Our brains are designed to synthesize emotional, logical, intuitive, and somatic information in ways that create a more complete understanding. The hormonal connection. But there's another layer to this that completely changed how I understood my own sleep patterns. Hormones. Our menstrual cycles don't just affect our reproductive system. They affect our sleep, our brain chemistry, and our access to different types of awareness. During the first half of your cycle, follicular phase, your brain produces more of the neurotransmitters associated with focus and logical thinking. Sleep tends to be lighter, and you might have more analytical or problem-solving types of the dreams. But during the second half of your cycle, luteal phase, your brain produces more of the neurotransmitters associated with introspection and emotional processing. Sleep becomes deeper and more restorative, and dreams become more emotionally rich and symbolic. Right before your period, many women experience changes in their sleep patterns. We might wake up more in the middle of the night, have more vivid dreams, or feel more emotionally sensitive. I'd always thought of this as a problem, like my sleep was broken or my hormones were making me crazy. But what I learned is that this is actually when we have the most access to our intuitive wisdom. Those middle of the night wake-ups aren't insomnia. They're opportunities for deep introspection and insight that aren't available during other parts of our cycle. Those vivid emotional dreams aren't just hormonal weirdness. They're our brains processing complex emotional material and revealing insights about our relationships and life direction. My insomnia breakthrough. This completely reframed how I understood my own sleep struggles. Remember those 3 a.m. wake-ups I mentioned? They weren't happening randomly. They were happening during the luteal phase of my cycle, when my brain was primed for introspection and emotional processing. Instead of fighting the wakefulness, I started working with it. When I would wake up in the middle of the night, instead of immediately trying to get back to sleep, I would lie there and notice what was coming up for me. Sometimes it was anxiety about a work situation, and I would breathe through it and let my body process the stress instead of trying to think my way out of it. Sometimes it was clarity about a relationship or a decision I needed to make. Instead of dismissing these insights as just late night thoughts, I started paying attention to them and often acting on them during the day. Sometimes it was creative ideas or solutions to problems I'd been stuck on. I started keeping a journal by my bed so I could capture these insights without fully waking up. And here's what was amazing. The more I worked with my natural sleep rhythms instead of fighting them, the better I slept overall. Those middle of the night wake-ups became shorter and less stressful. I started falling back asleep more easily because I wasn't anxious about being awake. But more importantly, I started feeling more connected to myself and more confident in my decision-making during the day. The default mode network discovery. There was one piece of research that completely changed how I understood what was happening during those quiet nighttime moments. It's about something called the default mode network. The default mode network is a set of brain regions that become active when you're not focused on the outside world and your mind is wandering freely. It's most active during rest, during meditation, during daydreaming, and during certain stages of sleep. Scientists used to think this network was just idling, like your brain's screensaver, but newer research shows that the default mode network is actually doing incredibly important work. It's integrating information from different time periods, past experiences, present circumstances, and future possibilities. It's making sense of who you are as a person and how all the pieces of your life fit together. It's what gives you that sense of continuous identity and helps you understand your place in the world. But here's the key. The default mode network can only do this work when your task-focused, problem-solving brain is quiet. During the day, when you're constantly focused on external tasks and stimuli, your default mode network barely gets to function. You're too busy responding to emails and making decisions and managing your environment to access this deeper level of self-understanding. But at night, when your conscious mind relaxes, the default mode network comes online and starts doing its magic. This is why you might go to bed feeling confused about a situation and wake up with clarity. Your default mode network has been working all night to integrate all the different pieces of information, logical, emotional, somatic, intuitive, into a coherent understanding. Why this matters for feminine energy. Here's where everything started to click for me. What I was calling divine feminine energy wasn't some mystical concept. It was actually a specific way of processing information and making decisions that my brain was naturally designed to do. Feminine energy operates through integration rather than compartmentalization, through synthesis rather than analysis, through sensing and feeling and knowing rather than just thinking. And sleep, particularly the stages where my conscious analytical mind was quiet, was when I had the most access to this way of being. During the day, I was operating mostly from my left brain, my prefrontal cortex, my task-focused networks. This isn't bad or wrong, but it's only one way of processing information. At night, I had access to my right brain, my limbic system, my default mode network. I could integrate emotional, intuitive, somatic, and logical information in ways that gave me a more complete understanding of situations. The problem was that I'd been trained to dismiss any insights that didn't come through logical analysis. I'd been treating my intuitive knowing as less valid than my analytical thinking. But what the science showed me was that both types of processing are valid and important. And actually, the most accurate and wise decisions come from integrating both types of information. The integration challenge. This is where I started to understand why so many women feel disconnected from themselves and their power in our current culture. We live in a world that values only one type of intelligence, the kind that can be measured, analyzed, and explained logically. We're taught to make decisions based on pros and cons lists, to ignore our gut feelings, to dismiss our dreams and intuitions as irrational. But our brains are designed to integrate multiple types of intelligence. We're literally wired to synthesize logical, emotional, intuitive, and somatic information. When we try to operate from only our analytical mind, we're using maybe 30% of our brain's capacity for wisdom and insight. And when we don't create space for our integrative, intuitive processing to happen, we end up feeling disconnected from ourselves, unsure about our decisions, and exhausted from trying to figure everything out with our thinking minds. The cultural programming problem. The more I understood the science, the more I realized how backwards our approach to sleep and feminine energy really is. Our culture treats sleep as this inconvenient necessity that we need to optimize and control. We have sleep trackers and apps and protocols designed to make our sleep as efficient and predictable as possible. But sleep isn't supposed to be efficient and predictable. It's supposed to be dynamic and responsive to what we need on any given night. Some nights we need more emotional processing. Some nights we need more memory consolidation. Some nights we need more creative problem solving. Some nights we need more deep physical restoration. Our brains are smart enough to adjust our sleep architecture to give us what we need if we let them. But instead of trusting this natural intelligence, we try to force our sleep into a one-size-fits-all pattern, and then we wonder why we wake up feeling disconnected from ourselves. Similarly, our culture treats intuitive knowing as less valid than logical analysis. We're taught to think it through instead of feeling it through. We're told to make decisions based on data rather than trusting what our bodies and hearts are telling us. But the science shows that our most accurate and wise decisions come from integrating both types of information. Pure logical analysis misses crucial data that our emotional and somatic intelligence can detect. The resistance I encountered. As I started sharing what I was learning with friends and family, I encountered something interesting. Resistance. People were fascinated by the science, but when it came to actually trusting their own non-logical insights, they got uncomfortable. But how do you know the difference between intuition and just wishful thinking? What if you make the wrong decision based on a feeling? Shouldn't you analyze things thoroughly before making important choices? I understood the resistance because I'd felt it too. We've been so conditioned to distrust anything that can't be measured or explained that the idea of making decisions based on inner knowing feels scary and irresponsible. But here's what I started to realize. We make decisions based on incomplete information all the time. Even our most thorough logical analysis is based on limited data and filtered through our existing beliefs and biases. At least when we include our intuitive and somatic intelligence, we're accessing additional sources of information that our analytical mind can't perceive. The missing piece. All of this research was helping me understand what had happened that night in March and why working with my natural sleep rhythms was giving me access to different kinds of wisdom and insight. But there was still something missing. I understood the science, I was starting to trust my own inner knowing, but I was still inconsistent in my ability to access this deeper awareness. Some nights I would have profound insights and wake up feeling connected and clear. Other nights I would just sleep normally and wake up in regular daytime mind mode. I realized that understanding the science wasn't enough. I needed to learn how to create the conditions for this deeper processing to happen more consistently. And that's where I started to uncover all the things in my daily life that were actually working against my natural sleep, wisdom, and feminine energy activation. The cultural programming ran deeper than just trust your logic over your intuition. There were habits, beliefs, and ways of living that were literally rewiring my nervous system to stay in fight or flight mode even during sleep. In part 4, I'm going to share what I discovered about these hidden blocks, the surprising places we pick up sleep shame, and why it's sabotaging our access to inner wisdom, how our daily hustle culture literally rewires our brains to work against us, and why trying harder to sleep better was actually making everything worse. Because here's what I learned. It's not enough to understand that your feminine energy has wisdom to offer. You have to actively dismantle all the programming that's keeping you stuck in masculine energy mode, even when you're sleeping. So here I was, armed with all this fascinating science about how my brain was designed to access deeper wisdom during sleep, feeling like I'd cracked some kind of code. I understood why those middle-of-the-night insights felt so real and valuable. I knew that my feminine energy wasn't some mystical concept, but an actual neurological process that my brain was wired to do. But understanding the science and actually living it consistently were two very different things. Because even though I now knew that my 3 a.m. wake-ups could be doorways to insight rather than just annoying sleep disruptions, I still found myself fighting them half the time. Even though I understood that my dreams were valuable communications from my subconscious, I'd still dismiss them as soon as my logical mind kicked in each morning. And even though I knew that my intuitive hits were accessing real information that my analytical mind couldn't perceive, I'd still second-guess myself and defer to what seemed more rational or practical. It was like I had this amazing new understanding of how I was designed to operate, but there were all these invisible forces working against me actually living that way. So I started getting curious about what was blocking me. What was keeping me from consistently accessing and trusting this inner wisdom that I now knew was real and valid? And what I discovered was that the programming ran way deeper than I'd realized. The sleep shame. Nobody talks about. The first thing I had to confront was something I'd never even recognized as a problem. Sleep shame. You know how we have body shame in our culture? That constant feeling that our bodies are somehow wrong and need to be fixed or controlled or optimized. Well, we have the exact same thing with sleep, and it's sabotaging our ability to access our deeper wisdom. Think about the messages we get about sleep from the moment we're kids. Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Notice it's makes a man, not a woman. You snooze, you lose. Sleep when you're dead, rise and grind. We're taught that productive people don't need much sleep, that successful people wake up at 5 a.m. and immediately start crushing their goals. That if you're sleeping more than 7 hours, or waking up naturally instead of with an alarm, you're somehow lazy or undisciplined. And for women specifically, there's this extra layer of shame around needing different amounts of sleep at different times in our cycle, or having our sleep patterns affected by our hormones, or needing more rest during certain seasons of our lives. I realized I'd internalized all of this without even knowing it. Every time I woke up in the middle of the night, there was this immediate voice in my head saying, "You should be sleeping, this is wrong, you need to fix this." Every time I felt like I needed more sleep than the standard 8 hours, I'd feel guilty about it. Every time my sleep patterns shifted with my menstrual cycle, I'd get frustrated with my body for not being consistent. And here's the thing. When you approach sleep from a place of shame and control, your nervous system gets the message that it's not safe to fully relax. Your body stays in a subtle state of vigilance, even when you're asleep. You can't access your deeper wisdom when your system doesn't feel safe enough to drop into those receptive, vulnerable states. The hustle culture rewiring, but the sleep shame was just the tip of the iceberg. The bigger issue was how our entire culture of constant productivity and hustle was literally rewiring my nervous system to work against my natural rhythms. Let me paint you a picture of what my typical day looked like before I understood any of this. I'd wake up to an alarm, usually hitting snooze at least once while feeling guilty about it. Before I even got out of bed, I'd check my phone. Emails, texts, social media, news, So my nervous system would go from the soft, receptive state of sleep to full activation within minutes. I'd rush through my morning routine while mentally planning my entire day. I'd listen to podcasts or news while getting ready, consuming information the whole time. At work, I'd switch between tasks constantly. Email, meetings, projects, phone calls, more email. My brain would spend the entire day in task-focused, problem-solving mode. I'd eat lunch while working or while scrolling my phone. No breaks, no pause, no moment for my nervous system to reset. After work, I'd go to the gym. Good for me, right? But I'd spend the whole time listening to high-energy music or podcasts, keeping my system amped up. I'd come home and immediately start on household tasks, dinner, planning for the next day. Maybe I'd watch TV to relax, but even that was stimulating content that kept my brain engaged and active. Right before bed, I'd do one final check of my phone, maybe some evening skincare routine, but the whole time I'd be mentally reviewing the day or planning tomorrow. Then I'd get into bed and wonder why I couldn't fall asleep or why I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my mind racing. See the pattern? From the moment I woke up to the moment I tried to sleep, my nervous system was in constant activation mode. Go, 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 do, think. There was literally no space in my day for receptivity, for rest, or for the kind of soft, open awareness that allows deeper wisdom to emerge. The masculine energy trap. What I realized is that I'd been living my entire life in what I now understand as masculine energy mode. And I want to be super clear here. Masculine energy isn't bad or wrong. We need both masculine and feminine energy to be whole, balanced people. Masculine energy is about focus, direction, goal achievement, logic, structure. It's the energy that gets things done, that makes plans and executes them, that solves problems and creates results. Feminine energy is about flow, intuition, receptivity, creativity, emotional intelligence, cyclical awareness. It's the energy that knows things without knowing how it knows them, that can sense what's needed in any situation, that creates and nurtures and heals. The problem in our culture is that we've decided masculine energy is superior. We've built our entire society around masculine energy values: linear progress, constant growth, efficiency, productivity, logical analysis. And we've either completely dismissed feminine energy or we've tried to turn it into another form of productivity. Like, use your intuition to be more efficient, or tap into your creativity to get ahead in your career, but feminine energy doesn't work like that. It's not a tool you can use to achieve masculine energy goals. It has its own wisdom, its own timing, its own way of operating, and it requires space. It requires receptivity. It requires the willingness to not be in control and not know what's going to happen next. All of this constant doing and achieving and optimizing that our culture celebrates, it's the complete opposite of the conditions that allow feminine energy to emerge. The control paradox. Here's where things got really interesting. The more I tried to control my sleep and optimize my access to inner wisdom, the more elusive it became. I'd read about the importance of sleep hygiene, so I'd create these elaborate bedtime routines. But I'd approach them like a productivity hack. If I do A, B, and C, then I'll get result D. I'd try to force myself to have meaningful dreams by setting intentions before bed. But intention setting from a controlling, goal-oriented mindset is still masculine energy. I'd get frustrated when my sleep patterns didn't match what the apps or books said they should be. I'd try to make my natural rhythms fit into some external standard instead of learning to work with what my body actually needed. I'd even try to schedule my insights and creative downloads, like, okay, it's time for inner wisdom now. Come on, subconscious, give me some clarity about my life. But feminine energy doesn't respond to force or control or demands. It responds to invitation, to receptivity, to creating space, and then allowing whatever wants to emerge to emerge. The harder I tried to make it happen, the more it slipped away from me. The perfectionism prison. And underneath all of this was a layer of perfectionism that I didn't even realize was there. I wanted to be good at accessing my feminine energy. I wanted to have the most insightful dreams and the clearest intuitive guidance and the most profound midnight revelations. But perfectionism is also masculine energy. It's goal-oriented, controlling, focused on external validation and achievement. True feminine energy includes messiness, uncertainty, not knowing, being in process. It includes having dreams that don't make sense, getting guidance that feels unclear, having insights that contradict each other. I had to learn that working with my feminine energies wasn't another thing to master or optimize. It was a relationship to develop, a dialogue to engage in, a dance to learn. And like any relationship, it required patience, trust, and the willingness to be imperfect. The comparison trap social media made all of this worse, obviously. I'd see influencers posting about their 5 a.m. morning routines, their perfect sleep tracking stats, their profound spiritual insights, their seemingly effortless connection to their inner wisdom. And I'd compare my messy, inconsistent, still figuring it out process to their highlight reels. I'd wonder why my dreams weren't as symbolic and meaningful as the ones I'd read about in books. I'd worry that maybe I just wasn't spiritually evolved enough to access deep wisdom. I'd think that other women were naturally more intuitive and connected, and I was somehow broken or behind. But here's what I learned. Everyone's relationship with their inner wisdom is different. Some people are naturally more connected to their dreams. Some people get guidance through body sensations. Some people receive insights through synchronicities or creative impulses. There's no right way to access your feminine energy, and there's definitely no timeline for how quickly you should be able to do it. The productivity addiction. Maybe the hardest thing for me to confront was how addicted I was to feeling productive and accomplished. Even when I intellectually understood that constant doing was working against me, I felt anxious and restless when I tried to slow down. Sitting quietly without a task felt lazy. Lying in bed awake without trying to fix it felt wasteful. Having a day without clear accomplishments felt like I was falling behind somehow. I realized that I'd been using productivity and busyness as a way to avoid feeling my emotions, to avoid uncertainty, to avoid the vulnerability that comes with not being in control. As long as I was constantly doing something, I could avoid dealing with the deeper questions about what I actually wanted, whether I was living authentically, how I really felt about my relationships and my life choices. Staying busy was a form of emotional avoidance, and as long as I was avoiding my inner world during the day, I couldn't fully access it at night either. The fear of what I might find. As I started to peel back these layers, I realized there was something even deeper going on. Part of me was actually afraid of what I might discover if I really tuned into my inner wisdom. What if I found out I was in the wrong career? What if I realized I needed to make major changes in my life? What if my intuition told me things that were inconvenient or scary or would require me to disappoint people? What if the reason I'd been staying so busy and distracted was because on some level, I already knew things weren't aligned and I was afraid to face that truth? It's easier to stay confused and overwhelmed than to get clear about what needs to change. It's easier to say, I don't know what I want, than to admit you do know, but you're scared to go after it. I realized that part of my resistance to accessing my feminine wisdom wasn't just cultural programming, it was self-protection. My busy mind was protecting me from having to face uncomfortable truths about my life. The people-pleasing block. There was another layer too. As women, many of us are socialized to prioritize other people's needs, opinions, and comfort over our own inner knowing. We learn to be agreeable, to avoid conflict, to make sure everyone else is happy before we tend to our own needs. We learn that being selfish or difficult is the worst thing we can be. But accessing your feminine wisdom requires you to trust your own inner guidance even when it contradicts what others want from you. It requires you to honor your own needs and boundaries even when that disappoints people. I noticed that some of my clearest intuitive hits were about situations where I needed to say no to someone, or set a boundary, or make a choice that prioritized my well-being over someone else's convenience. And my people-pleasing programming would immediately try to talk me out of trusting those insights. Maybe you're being too sensitive. Maybe you should just go along with it. Maybe you're making it a bigger deal than it needs to be. I had to learn that part of developing a relationship with my inner wisdom was learning to disappoint people sometimes. Learning that other people's comfort was not more important than my own authenticity. The spiritual bypass temptation. As I got deeper into this work, I also had to watch out for what's called spiritual bypassing, using spiritual concepts to avoid dealing with practical reality. It's tempting to think that if you just connect with your feminine energy and trust your intuition, everything in your life will magically fall into place, that you won't have to deal with difficult emotions or challenging situations or mundane responsibilities. But that's not how it works. Accessing your inner wisdom doesn't exempt you from being human. It doesn't mean you'll never feel confused or make mistakes or have to deal with hard things. What it does is give you more information to work with. It gives you access to your own inner guidance system so you can navigate life's challenges from a more grounded, authentic place. But you still have to show up. You still have to take action. You still have to do the work of living. The integration challenge. All of these blocks and obstacles weren't separate issues I could address one at a time. They were all interconnected, all reinforcing each other, all part of the same system that was keeping me disconnected from my deeper wisdom. The sleep shame was connected to the productivity addiction. The control issues were connected to the people-pleasing. The fear of what I might find was connected to the perfectionism. The comparison trap was connected to the spiritual bypassing. I realized that I couldn't just change my nighttime routine and expect everything to shift. I had to look at how I was living my entire life and recognize all the ways I was unconsciously working against my own natural rhythms and inner knowing. This was overwhelming at first. It felt like everything in my life needed to change, like I had to completely rewire my entire personality and relationship to the world. But then I realized something important. I didn't have to fix everything at once. I didn't have to become a completely different person overnight. What I needed was a sustainable way to start creating more space for my feminine energy to emerge. A way to gradually shift from living in constant masculine energy mode to finding a better balance between doing and being, thinking and feeling, controlling and allowing. The turning point question. The question that changed everything for me was this: what would it look like to approach my life as if my inner wisdom actually mattered? Not as a nice to have bonus when I had time for it, but as essential information that I needed to consider in every decision. What would change if I treated my need for rest and receptivity as seriously as I treated my need for productivity and achievement? What would be different if I trusted that my body, my emotions, my dreams, and my intuition were giving me valuable guidance instead of dismissing them as inconvenient or irrational? How would I structure my days differently if I knew that creating space for inner wisdom was as important as checking things off my to-do list? This wasn't about throwing away logic and analysis and living purely on intuition. It was about creating a more integrated approach that honored both my thinking mind and my feeling body, both my doing energy and my being energy. But to do that, I needed practical tools. I needed actual practices that could help me create space for my feminine energy to emerge, even in the midst of a busy life. I needed a way to work with my natural rhythms instead of against them, to honor my cyclical nature instead of trying to force consistency, to trust my inner knowing instead of constantly second-guessing myself. And that's when I discovered the 3-phase sleep ritual that changed everything. In part 5, I'm going to walk you through exactly what I learned from women who naturally radiate divine feminine energy, their secret nighttime habits that nobody talks about, the simple evening practice that tells your body it's safe to drop into receptive mode, and the one mindset shift that turned my bedroom from a place of stress and striving into an actual sanctuary. Because here's what I realized. You don't have to dismantle every piece of cultural programming before you can start accessing your inner wisdom. You just need to create consistent space for her to emerge. And it's simpler than you think, but it's also completely different from everything our culture teaches us about sleep and rest and feminine power. After months of understanding the science but still struggling to consistently access my inner wisdom, I started getting really curious about women who seem to naturally embody this connected, grounded energy I was trying to cultivate. You know the ones I'm talking about. They have this calm presence that makes you feel centered just by being around them. They seem to know things without having to analyze them to death. They make decisions with confidence, but also with ease, like they're tapped into some internal guidance system that the rest of us are missing. I started paying attention to these women, friends, acquaintances, women I'd meet at coffee shops or in yoga classes, and I started asking them about their nighttime routines. What I discovered completely changed how I thought about sleep preparation. The women who just knew. The first woman who really opened my eyes to this was my friend's mom, Elena. She was in her 50s, had raised 3 kids while running her own business, and had this amazing ability to give advice that was both practical and deeply wise. I was going through a particularly confusing time with a relationship, and I asked her how she always seemed to know what to do in complicated situations. "Oh, honey," she said, "I don't figure it out. I just ask the question before I go to sleep, and I usually wake up knowing." This was so foreign to my approach of making endless pros and cons lists and talking through every possible scenario with my friends until we were all exhausted. So I asked her more about it. What did she mean by asking the question? How did she know the answer was real and not just wishful thinking? What she described wasn't some elaborate ritual or spiritual practice. It was simple and practical, but it was also completely different from how I'd been approaching sleep. I spend a few minutes each night just settling, she explained, not trying to solve anything or figure anything out, just acknowledging whatever's on my heart and then letting it go, like handing it over to the part of me that's wiser than my worried mind. She told me that she'd been doing this since her early 20s when her grandmother had taught her. My abuela always said that the answers we need come when our minds get quiet, but we have to create the space for the quiet. The 3 phases. I started noticing. As I talked to more women like Elena, I started noticing a pattern in how they approached the transition from day to night. It wasn't random or intuitive. There was actually a structure to it, though none of them had ever consciously named it. They all did some version of 3 phases: release, receive, and rest. Phase 1. Release was about consciously letting go of the day, not just physically stopping their activities, but emotionally and energetically completing the day so they could be present to whatever wanted to emerge. Phase 2. Receive was about creating space for their inner wisdom to surface. This looked different for everyone, but it always involved some form of quiet, receptive attention. Phase 3. Rest was about surrendering to sleep with trust instead of anxiety, treating their bedroom as a sacred space rather than just another place to collapse. None of these women called it a ritual or made it sound mystical or complicated. To them, it was just how you prepared for sleep if you wanted to wake up feeling connected to yourself. Phase 1. The art of release. Let me tell you what I learned about release, because this was the phase I'd been completely skipping. Most of us transition from day to night by just stopping. We finish our last task, brush our teeth, and get into bed. But our nervous systems are still carrying all the energy and stimulation and unfinished business from the day. It's like trying to have a meaningful conversation with someone while music is blasting in the background. The wisdom is there, but you can't hear it over all the noise. Elena taught me that release isn't about reviewing your day or processing everything that happened. It's about consciously completing your relationship with the day so you can be present to the night. Her version was simple. She would sit on the edge of her bed for just 5 minutes and mentally acknowledge 3 things from the day. Something she was grateful for, something she had learned, and something she was ready to let go of. I don't try to fix anything or figure anything out, she explained. I just say, okay, this happened today. I see it. I'm complete with it for now. Another woman I talked to, Sarah, had a different approach. She would spend 10 minutes writing in a journal, but not in the way you might think. She wouldn't analyze or problem solve. She would just dump everything that was on her mind onto the paper. Worries, to-do items, random thoughts, emotions, and then close the journal. It's like taking everything out of my mental backpack and setting it down for the night, she said. I know it'll still be there tomorrow if I need to deal with it, but I don't have to carry it into my sleep. A third woman, Maria, would do a simple body scan, starting from her feet and moving up to her head, consciously relaxing each part and thanking it for carrying her through the day. The specific practice didn't matter as much as the intention, creating a clear transition between day consciousness and night consciousness. What I discovered about my own release. When I started experimenting with this, I realized how much mental and emotional clutter I'd been carrying into my sleep. No wonder I couldn't access deeper wisdom. My inner space was completely full of unfinished business from the day. My first attempts at release were honestly pretty messy. I'd sit on the edge of my bed and try to acknowledge my day, but my mind would immediately start problem solving or planning for tomorrow. So I had to get more specific about it. I created what I started calling my day completion practice. I would light a candle and sit in my bedroom for 10 minutes. I'd take 3 deep breaths and then mentally review the day, not to analyze it, but just to witness it. Like watching a movie of my day from a calm, observational place. Then I would say, out loud, which felt weird at first, but was surprisingly powerful, "Thank you for this day. I did my best with what I knew. I'm ready to rest now." If there were specific worries or unresolved situations on my mind, I would acknowledge them. I see you, work stress. I see you, relationship confusion. I see you, money anxiety. And then I would consciously set them aside. I'm handing you over to my sleeping wisdom. We'll see what clarity comes. The key was that I wasn't trying to solve anything or make anything better. I was just creating a clear ending to the day so I could be present to whatever the night wanted to bring. Phase 2, creating space to receive. The receive phase was where things got really interesting. This was about creating the conditions for your inner wisdom to surface, not forcing it or demanding it, but simply making space for it. The women I talked to all had different ways of doing this, but they all involved some form of quiet, open attention. Elena would lie in bed with her eyes closed and simply ask, "What do I need to know right now?" Then she would just listen, not with her thinking mind, but with her whole body. Sometimes insights would come immediately. Sometimes they would come in dreams. Sometimes she would just wake up the next morning with clarity about something. Sarah would do what she called soft gazing, lying in bed and looking at the ceiling or out the window without focusing on anything specific. "It's like daydreaming, but with intention," she explained. "I'm not trying to think about anything, but I'm also not trying not to think. I'm just available." Maria had a practice she'd learned from her grandmother in Mexico. She would place her hands on her heart and her belly and just breathe slowly while asking her body, "What do you need me to know?" Sometimes my body would give me information about my health or about relationships or about decisions I needed to make, she told me. Not in words, but in feelings or sensations or just knowing. My receive practice, evolution. When I first started experimenting with the receive phase, I made the mistake of approaching it like meditation, trying to clear my mind completely or achieve some specific state. But that's not what this was about. This was about becoming receptive to whatever wanted to emerge from my inner wisdom, whether that was insights, emotions, creative ideas, or just a sense of peace. I started with something simple. After my day completion practice, I would lie down and place one hand on my heart and one on my belly. I would breathe slowly and just notice what was there, physically, emotionally, energetically. At first, what was usually there was more mental chatter or anxiety about my to-do list for tomorrow, but instead of fighting it or trying to make it go away, I would just acknowledge it. I see you, planning mind. I see you, worry. Then I would gently redirect my attention back to my body and ask, what else is here? Sometimes what was there was tension I hadn't noticed during the day. Sometimes it was emotions I'd been pushing aside. Sometimes it was creative ideas or insights about relationships or just a deep sense of tiredness that I hadn't been honoring. The key was approaching it with curiosity rather than judgment. Not trying to fix or change anything, just becoming aware of what was actually present. As I got more comfortable with this, I started asking more specific questions during the receive phase. Not demanding answers, but gently inquiring. If I was confused about a decision, I might ask, what feels most aligned for me here? And then listen with my whole body for the response. If I was feeling stuck in a relationship, I might ask, what wants to be expressed? Or what's trying to emerge in this situation? If I was feeling disconnected from my purpose, I might ask, what brings me alive? Or what wants to be created through me? The answers didn't always come immediately, and they didn't always come in words. Sometimes they came as images or sensations or just a shift in my energy. Sometimes they came the next day or in dreams or through synchronicities. But the more I practiced creating this receptive space, the more I started to trust that some part of me always knew what I needed to know. I just had to get quiet enough to hear it. Phase 3, sacred rest. The rest phase was about approaching sleep itself as a sacred act rather than just something that happened to me. Before I understood any of this, my bedroom was basically just the place where I collapsed at the end of the day. It was where I kept my laundry and charged my devices and scrolled social media and worried about tomorrow. But the women who seemed naturally connected to their inner wisdom all treated their sleeping space differently, not necessarily in an elaborate or expensive way, but with intention and care. Elena's bedroom was simple but beautiful, soft lighting, comfortable bedding, no electronics except for an analog clock. I want this to be a place where my soul feels safe to emerge, she explained. Sarah had created what she called a sleep sanctuary. Fresh flowers on her nightstand, essential oils, blackout curtains. When I walk into my bedroom, I want to immediately feel like I'm transitioning into a different kind of consciousness, she said. Maria's approach was even simpler. She just made sure her bedroom was clean and uncluttered. Chaos in my space creates chaos in my mind, she told me. I need the external quiet to access the internal quiet. The mindset shift that changed everything. But the physical changes to my bedroom weren't what made the biggest difference. It was the mindset shift about what sleep actually was. I'd been treating sleep like a necessary interruption to my real life, something I had to do to restore my energy so I could get back to the important stuff the next day. But what if sleep wasn't an interruption to my life? What if it was an essential part of my life? What if those 8 hours weren't just about physical recovery, but about connecting with a deeper part of myself that could only emerge when my conscious mind got out of the way? This completely changed how I approached going to bed. Instead of feeling like I was ending my day, I started feeling like I was beginning a different kind of experience. Instead of rushing through my bedtime routine to get to sleep as quickly as possible, I started approaching it as a transition into a sacred space. Instead of seeing my bedroom as just a place to rest my body, I started seeing it as a place where I could connect with my inner wisdom, creating my own 3-phase practice. It took me a few months to develop my own version of the 3 phases that felt authentic and sustainable. Here's what I eventually settled on. Release, 10-15 minutes. I would sit on the edge of my bed and light a small candle. I'd take 5 deep breaths and then mentally review my day, not to analyze it, but just to witness it with compassion. I would acknowledge 3 things: something I appreciated about the day, something I learned or grew from, and something I was ready to release. Then I would say out loud, I did my best with what I knew today. I'm ready to rest and receive whatever guidance wants to come. Receive 10-20 minutes. I would lie down with my hands on my heart and belly. I'd breathe slowly and ask my body what it needed me to know. If I had specific questions or situations I needed clarity on, I would gently pose them and then listen with my whole being for any response. Physical sensations, emotions, images, or just a sense of knowing. I wouldn't try to force answers or get frustrated if nothing came. I would just rest in the receptive space and trust that whatever needed to emerge would emerge in its own timing. Rest, ongoing. I would set an intention for my sleep. May my dreams bring wisdom. May my rest restore me. May I wake up more connected to who I really am. Then I would surrender to sleep with trust rather than anxiety, knowing that my inner wisdom would work on whatever needed to be processed during the night. What started happening? The changes weren't dramatic at first. I didn't suddenly start having profound prophetic dreams or waking up with life-changing insights every morning, but gradually I started noticing subtle shifts. I fell asleep more easily because I wasn't carrying the stress and mental clutter of the day into bed with me. I slept more deeply because my nervous system felt safer to fully relax. When I did wake up in the middle of the night, instead of immediately getting anxious about it, I would remember that this might be my inner wisdom trying to communicate. I'd lie quietly and listen to what was there. My dreams became more vivid and meaningful. Not every night, but regularly enough that I started keeping a dream journal. And most importantly, I started waking up feeling more like myself. More grounded, more connected to what I actually wanted and needed, less reactive to external pressures and expectations. The 3-phase practice was giving me a way to consistently create space for my feminine energy to emerge, even in the midst of a busy life. The resistance that came up. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were plenty of nights when I was too tired or stressed or busy to do the full practice. There were times when my analytical mind would kick in during the receive phase and try to problem solve instead of just listening. There were nights when I'd feel ridiculous talking out loud to myself or asking my body questions. There were mornings when I'd wake up and immediately dismiss any insights or dreams as just imagination. But I kept coming back to it because I could feel the difference on the nights when I did the practice versus the nights when I didn't. The practice nights led to more restful sleep, clearer thinking the next day, and a stronger sense of connection to myself. And gradually, it became less of a formal ritual and more of a natural way of transitioning from day to night. The specific steps became less important than the overall intention of creating space for my inner wisdom to emerge. The integration challenge. The real test came when I tried to maintain this practice during particularly stressful or busy periods in my life. When work was overwhelming, when I was dealing with relationship drama, when I was traveling, or my routine was disrupted. This is when I learned that the 3-phase practice wasn't just about accessing inner wisdom, it was about maintaining my connection to myself, even when life got chaotic. During stressful periods, the release phase became essential for processing the day's intensity instead of carrying it into my sleep. During confusing times, the receive phase gave me access to guidance that my anxious mind couldn't provide. During overwhelming periods, the rest phase reminded me that there was a part of me that was always peaceful and wise, even when my external circumstances were in turmoil. The practice became less about having mystical experiences and more about staying connected to my authentic self in the midst of a demanding world. The unexpected benefits. As I got more consistent with the 3-phase practice, I started noticing benefits I hadn't expected. My relationship with my body improved. The daily check-ins during the receive phase helped me notice tension, fatigue, or emotional needs earlier, before they built up into bigger issues. My decision-making became clearer and more confident. I was accessing information from both my logical mind and my intuitive wisdom, which led to choices that felt more aligned and sustainable. My relationships deepened. When I was more connected to myself, I could show up more authentically with others. I was less reactive and more responsive, less anxious and more present. My creativity expanded. The receptive space I was creating each night seemed to unlock creative ideas and inspiration that my busy daytime mind couldn't access. And perhaps most importantly, I started trusting myself more. Not just my ability to figure things out logically, but my deeper capacity for wisdom and knowing. The community. Effect one of the most beautiful things that happened as I developed this practice was that other women started asking me about it. They could sense something different in my energy, more grounded, more centered, more authentically myself. When I would share what I was doing, many of them wanted to try it too. We started having conversations about sleep and dreams and inner wisdom that we'd never had before. I realized that we'd all been hungry for this kind of deeper connection to ourselves, but we hadn't known how to access it or hadn't given ourselves permission to prioritize it. Some of my friends started their own versions of the 3-phase practice. Others developed different approaches, but with the same intention of creating space for their inner wisdom to emerge. What we all discovered was that this wasn't just about better sleep. It was about reclaiming a way of being that felt more authentic and sustainable than the constant doing and striving we'd been taught was the only way to live. The ripple effects. As my nighttime practice became more established, it started affecting how I lived during the day too. I became more aware of my natural rhythms and energy cycles. I started honoring my need for rest and quiet time instead of pushing through fatigue. I became more selective about how I spent my energy, saying no to commitments that didn't align with my values or goals. I started making decisions based on what felt right in my body, not just what looked good on paper. I began to trust that I didn't have to figure everything out with my conscious mind. I could pose questions to my inner wisdom and trust that guidance would come in its own timing. This shift from constantly trying to control and manage my life to learning to work with my natural rhythms and inner guidance was transformative in ways I couldn't have predicted. The questions that emerged. As the practice became more natural, new questions started emerging. How could I tell the difference between genuine inner wisdom and just wishful thinking? What did it mean when my dreams started feeling more meaningful and connected to my waking life? How could I integrate the insights I was receiving into practical action in my daily life? And most intriguingly, what would happen if I learned to live from this connected, grounded place consistently instead of just accessing it during my nighttime practice? These questions led me deeper into understanding how to recognize when the practice was actually working and how to distinguish between real shifts and just placebo effects or imagination. In part 6, I'm going to share what I learned about recognizing the signs that your divine feminine energy is actually awakening during sleep, how your dreams start speaking a different language, the unexpected ways other people begin responding to your energy differently, and why everything in my life started flowing more easily once I learned to listen while sleeping. Because here's what I discovered. When you consistently create space for your inner wisdom to emerge, your entire relationship with yourself and the world starts to shift in ways that are both subtle and profound.